Hi again then guys, and welcome to another instalment of Ultimate Fights, and this is a series which we don't do that often. They tend to be much more longer form and totally freestyle videos. I don't plan what I'm going to say, I don't have a script, this is totally just improv. And usually it's just based around an essential concept, which is an iconic character or creature or monster or alien pitted up against another iconic character, alien, etc. And we've discussed things like Alien versus The Thing, which is one of the most popular videos in this entire series. We've discussed The Thing versus The Blob, which is a pretty widely loved and widely wanted battle for obvious reasons. I've also done lesser known ones, like The Thing versus Splinter, which is a very undervalued monster, and also ones which you may not think of as being a good showdown, but that could potentially be really cool, like Predator versus Tremors. This time, you'll have noticed that the title is a little bit different, because I have not put in the title what I am putting, in this particular occasion, The Purge, which is more of a concept, of course, than a specific character, up against. And the reason why I didn't put that in the description, or in the title, is because I wanted this to be a surprise. If I'd have put what I have in mind in the title of the video, it would have ruined the surprise, because I have a very specific idea in mind. This is something which I'm surprised that more people aren't talking about. I'm sure that some people are. Doubtless other people have thought of this before. That's just the nature of the internet and the nature of how things work. But at least for me, this is an idea which I would love to see happen on the screen. Like most of these videos in this series, it probably never will, but I think of all of the ideas that I've had, the potential for something like this to actually happen is probably actually a little bit higher than some of the others due to the nature of the two properties that I'm talking about. Now, you'll have seen from the title that the one character, or concept and world in this case, that I'm talking about is the world of the Purge. Now, I was not a fan of the first Purge movie. I don't think it's a bad film. There was just one particular thing which I didn't like, and as you'll have seen, of course, at the start of this video, I will be talking some spoilers for the Purge franchise in particular. Not major spoilers really, but spoilers nonetheless. Now, in the first movie, it's a very small-scale movie. It takes into account a smaller budget. You have some interesting characters portrayed by usually very good actors and actresses, but in the particular film they don't really get the chance to show how good they really are, at least for me personally. The concept is an interesting one, having one day each year where for 12 hours you can do whatever you want to act as just that, an emotional purge of society, which in so doing allows people a release to reduce crime, etc. Whereas, of course, the implied reality is always there that, of course, the government wants that to happen because it gets rid of poor people. Now, of course, there are flaws in that concept, massive ones. For instance, the fact that you would spend most of the year cleaning up after the purge, and by the time you cleaned it up, the next purge would be there, so it would be an endless cycle of spending huge amounts of money to rebuild society every year. But even that aside, with the suspension of disbelief, it's an interesting concept to have. And by the nature of the purge, one of, if not the best, things I would say about the world of the Purge is that it's very interchangeable. You can very easily totally change location, of course within America, but that being said, you've got a lot of area to work with within America. You can totally swap out characters, you don't have to keep characters alive, you can kill them off, you can bring in new important people to root for, etc. And it allows you to present characters which you typically expect in a TV series, for instance, people dropping in and out, bringing in new characters, etc., but in the world of a movie. And that's pretty cool. It's something which I also like the Saw franchise for. You have those long-standing characters, but they can die at any time. You can bring new people in at any time. It keeps it fresh. Just like with Saw, I would say that The Purge does that similar thing very well. Now, the main issue that I had with the first film is that the stupid kid lets the homeless guy in. Now, that's a nice ideal to have. Of course he doesn't want him to die, but your own family's safety comes first. And to me, that is a major flaw in the film. The fact that he lets him in, the fact that everything from there is caused by the kid, just really annoyed me. I also personally found, though, that I enjoyed the second Purge movie, Anarchy, a lot more. And I mean a lot more. The first Purge movie wouldn't even be on, I don't think, my top 100 favourite movies. The Purge 2 would be. I liked it a lot more. And as I said, we're going to be talking some spoilers. And one of the spoilers that I want to talk about is the character played by Frank Grillo. He's a guy who I didn't particularly care for before this. I saw him as Crossbones in Civil War before watching The Purge 2, and I just kind of saw him as that stereotypical villain kind of military guy. In this film, he's not. In fact, he's kind of like a Punisher character, which is really cool to see within the world of The Purge. And speaking of the Punisher, he is a character who would work really well in this world. But that's not my idea, because that's low-hanging fruit. What I'm going for is something a lot more extreme than the Punisher. And I actually have an idea as to how it could unfold. Now, if you've seen the second Purge movie, Anarchy, you'll probably remember that at the start of the film, as we always do in a Purge film, you see a couple of hours before the Purge commences, there are still some of our main characters who are inexplicably not going to be able to get home, and so they're outside, etc., etc. Of course, you know they're going to end up stranded and surviving. Or not, as the case may be. And Frank Grillo's character ends up doing his thing, protecting them, not really choosing to initially, but his conscience forces him to, etc., etc. But at the start of the film in particular, or near the start, we see some interesting aspects of the Purge which we don't see in the first one, and that is the expansiveness of the world. You see gangs out on the streets, you see cleanup crews, in effect, hanging around behind the big predators to pick up the prey that they miss and make a bit of cash for themselves. You see guys who are just got the biggest toys you can buy, people are out on vendettas, and one of the best ideas is a character who doesn't even really play a decent role in the film, you just see him in passing. And this is a guy who's just got a beer in his hand, he's on the roof of a building, and he's got a sniper rifle. That's a superb idea. It's the way to hunt without being hunted. Because in order for someone to know that you're there, they'd have to be a military person. And most people who are out on that night aren't going to have that kind of knowledge. The second advantage that it gives you is that being on the top of a building, it's highly unlikely that the whole building is going to come down. Somebody might try and do that, but it's unlikely, it's kind of a waste of effort. And so you've only got to watch one entrance, and that's the door leading to the roof, probably behind you. It's a perfect scenario for someone who just wants to go up and kill people for that 12 hours. Now, what I would like to do is take that essential idea from the second film, that scene, and it's only around 20 seconds long, where you see this guy setting up his sniper rifle, and I want to make that much more significant. And here's how. Imagine the scene. It's a couple of hours away from Purge night at the start of the film. Our main characters, whoever they may be, doesn't really matter because that's not the point of what I'm saying. They're out, they're going to get stranded, etc., in a similar way to the second film, and we see a sniper setting up at the top of a building. He walks up the stairs carrying a case. He goes up, opens the door, sets up his little fishing chair, or whatever the case may be, with his beer on the ledge on the side of the building, locks the door behind him, maybe puts a little laser sensor across the door so that he knows if someone's coming up behind him, sets up his rifle on the edge of the building with his little tripod, attaches his scope, suppressor on the end of the barrel, etc. He sits down. It's dark now, the Purge has started, and he's got his beer in his hand, looks down the scope, the camera is at the bottom of the barrel, looking up at him, kind of zooms slowly in towards his face as he's scanning the streets, looking for predators or prey to pick off. He notices some shouts coming from a nearby street. You see a homeless guy, or maybe a couple of them, running down the pavement with gangs of some kind chasing them. We follow the sight of his rifle as it follows the gang members, maybe armed with bats, axes, whatever. But then his scope moves from the gang members to the homeless guys. Is he going to shoot them? Is he going to shoot the gang guys? Well, who knows? He probably doesn't care either way, because at the end of the day, he's just there to hunt. But as he looks down the barrel, and the camera, as I said, is looking from the bottom of the barrel up at him so you can see his face, one eye closed, poised, controlling his breath to keep the shot perfect. The camera switches to a side view, a close-up of his finger on the trigger. As his finger slowly comes back bringing in the trigger. There's no sound at all. Nothing. You can't hear anyone screaming. There's no night noise. A brief dull in the storm of the Purge where it's totally silent. He takes in a breath, squeezes back on the trigger, and just before he fires the shot, you hear from over his shoulder, and when he turns around, he slowly looks up, his eyes wide, and 3 triangular red dots move up his face and rest on his forehead. And you can guess what happens then. Because my idea, and that's why I didn't want to spoil it in the title, is the world and all of the associated hunters and hunted, nutters who are deliberately out on that night just to cause mayhem, people who consider themselves to be the meanest and the baddest when it comes to killing, are all out on that night for 12 hours in the concrete jungle. And who better to hunt the worst of man than the ultimate hunter? So my idea is to take the world, the rules, etc. of the Purge, and then place into that world one of the ultimate movie hunters, the Predator. It's the perfect night. It's totally justified that he would be there. And not only would he be there, but the fact that these people are scum of the earth means that you don't really care if he kills them. And that's great, because it allows for so many more deaths than we see in the Predator films. If you wanted to, you could have great characters with different kinds of weapons. You could have snipers, you could have street gangs, you could have people in armoured cars. You could have all kinds of rivals to go up against the Predator. And of course, he's only there for one reason: to hunt down the best, the worst, the meanest of them. As far as I'm concerned, it's a crossover which could really work well, more so as an environment for the Predator rather than a straight-up character versus character battle. But the way I see it, this kind of falls under that Ultimate Fights category, because you're essentially turning the world of the Purge into kind of a character in its own right, and then pitting that up against one of the best hunters in movie history. Now, as far as a story, as far as rules, etc., I think that's another advantage. You don't really have to get too heavy. The Predator movies themselves do have undertones and subtext there if you want to look into them. The fact, for instance, that people often think that the Predator rips your skull and spine out. But that's not really always the case. Often he will just hang people and skin them, or just blow their heads off with a laser, all of which you can see in the first movie. And if you actually take note in that first film, he only actually removes the skull and spine from one of the team members. And the team member who he does that to is the only member of the team who is willing to stand man to man in broad daylight with the disadvantage of not being able to see him with a knife. And that character is, of course, the tracker, Billy. Now, as far as I see it, and I haven't looked into the extended universe of Predators, so I may be wrong, but what I got from that is that the reason why the Predator removed his skull and spine is because he was worthy of that. He was an opponent who the Predator respected because he went up against the Predator just with a knife. Now, unless I'm wrong about that, that's cool. It gives you an insight into what we already know about the Predator in terms of honor, that kind of thing. But it presents it in a very nice, subtle way, which you could actually easily miss and just think it's there for the sake of gore, where it actually really isn't. Now, in this movie, you could have that kind of thing showcased again. You could have the Predator going up against people who it doesn't really think are that honourable, but may be good killers anyway, but then go up against people who maybe do have more honour. They're there more on a mono-in-mono kind of way. So there's plenty of opportunity for gratuitous deaths, which you'd want to see in a Predator film, but also, of course, for the human group. Maybe one or more people who you follow through the story trying to survive not only these crazy people on the streets, but of course the much bigger threat, the initially unseen threat, of the Predator. So at the same time as being a great world crossover, I think it would be a nice homage to both Predator 2 in particular, with that concrete jungle aspect, and also the Purge 2, kind of an homage of those two primary ideas and worlds merged together. So it's a pretty simple crossover this time, and I don't really have a huge amount in mind as far as story. I just thought up that opening scene, and it was something that I thought would play out really well, and the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It's just such a great opportunity for a crossover that could actually work, because there's nothing in the Purge universe which could say that the Predator shouldn't be there. There's no evidence to suggest that there are limits imposed on the Purge universe. Who's to say that there aren't extraterrestrials in that universe? And the Predator could be a great one, and one who is totally justified in being there. But that's basically it for my overall concept. It was just something which I wanted to put out there, and seeing as I already do this series, I think it falls quite well in line with it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below about that, or maybe a totally different concept which you'd like to see, maybe with the Predator, or of course the world of the Purge. One of the great things about the Purge, as I said earlier, is that it's such a broad and expansive world that you could quite easily pluck characters from other films and insert them into that world really easily. As I said earlier, the Punisher, he fits in there perfectly. You could even have Batman in there. The problem for Batman would be that he would not be able to prevent all the death, so that would create kind of issues there. Whereas with the Punisher, he already knows that he can't prevent all the deaths, so that would be kind of more appropriate storyline-wise, but either way, it would be cool. For this particular idea, though, I'd love to see the Predator. But that's it overall for this particular Ultimate Fights, and I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.